All right, let's start with some news that's just coming in from New Delhi, where India's Ministry of External Affairs has responded to queries regarding Prime Minister Narendra Modi's response to Imran Khan's congratulatory message. Now, the spokesperson of India's External Affairs Minister has said, and I quote here, that as per the established diplomatic practice, the Prime Minister and the External Affairs Ministry have responded to the congratulatory messages that were received from their counterparts in Pakistan. In their messages, they have highlighted that India seeks normal and cooperative relations with all neighbours, including Pakistan. Now, in his message, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said, and I quote him here, "For this, it is important to build an environment of trust, free of terror and violence and hostility." Now, the External Affairs Ministry has also emphasized the need for an atmosphere that is free from the shadow of terror and violence, unquote. All right, so this is in fact the message that is coming out from the External Affairs Ministry, where on the question when it was asked, did the Prime Minister and did India's External Affairs Ministry respond to the congratulatory messages from Prime Minister Imran Khan, this is what has been said, that the Indian Prime Minister and also the Indian External Affairs Ministry did write back to Pakistan, but have emphasized that Pakistan first needs to crack down on terror. And for more perspective on how things of this nature actually play out between two nations, we are joined in firstly by Mr. Vivek Kaju, who is former India's ambassador to Afghanistan, who is joining us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much indeed, Ambassador Kaju, for joining us. And let me just begin by asking you this. Now, this question was asked to the Ministry of External Affairs, wherein did the Indian Prime Minister write back to the congratulatory message that was sent to him by Pakistan, for which there has been an answer in the positive, stating that India has, of course, written back to Pakistan after the congratulatory message, but has also emphasized that Pakistan needs to curb terror, and only then is there a possibility of talks. So I would like you to weigh in on this.
Look, I think the ministry is right in saying that the Prime Minister's reply to a congratulatory message is in keeping with, as they put it, established diplomatic norms. I can tell you that when I was involved in the handling of India's relations with Pakistan in the Ministry of External Affairs, this was a routine matter. Whenever a new Indian Prime Minister came in, the Pakistani counterpart always sent a message of goodwill, and we responded. Drafts were put up by the ministry to the high personalities, and they then approved them and sent them across. This time, there is one or two things on which I would like to comment. The first is that Pakistan always likes to project that its relationship with India, given its status, is a little different from India's relationship with other neighbors. It wants a priority.
Right.
Now, the Prime Minister in his message has said, and that is something noticeable, that India wants good relations with all its neighbors, which of course also includes Pakistan. So in a very subtle way, what the Indian side is communicating is that Pakistan is another neighbor like any other neighbor which India has. So that is one thing which is noticeable. The second is a reiteration of the basic proposition that India has pursued after the Uri attack, and which was made clear in public statements after the elections and Mr. Modi's victory, that we want good relations. For that, of course, while this has not been specified, for that dialogue would have to take place. But all this is possible only if there is no violence and terrorism. I think this is a very appropriate response to the congratulatory messages sent by the Pakistani Prime Minister and its Foreign Minister, and the Indian counterparts, Prime Minister Modi and External Affairs Minister Jaishankar, have responded, I think, appropriately.
I think that's an interesting take on this controversy that seems to be playing out. Meanwhile, do continue to stay on with us, Ambassador Kaju. I'm also told that we are joined in by my colleague Siddhant Sibil for more on this. Siddhant, this is an interesting bit of a answer that's been given by the Ministry of External Affairs when they were asked, has India responded to the congratulatory messages from Pakistan, especially the Pakistani Prime Minister and also the Foreign Minister of Pakistan. What more do we know of what is playing out presently so far as this case is concerned?
Well, it's a reiteration of what New Delhi has been saying for a pretty long time, that it's up to Pakistan. The onus is on Pakistan to create an environment free of terrorism, and the policy that has been continuing since 2014, that talks and terror can't go together, stands, and that will be the main policy and priority of the Modi government in its second term. We have seen it's been almost more than four weeks since the Modi government has taken charge, and since that we have seen number of interaction, especially from the Pakistani side. Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan first calling the Indian Prime Minister, congratulating him on his victory, and then of course we saw the letters being sent by the Pakistani side, the Pakistani Prime Minister sending, and of course both the leaders were together for several hours in Bishkek in that plenary hall where the SCO leaders were meeting. But we know India gave a cold shoulder to the Pakistani Prime Minister, and there were of course pleasantries exchanged, but by and large no talks happened, no policide happened, something that WION was the first child to break, and continued that this is going to happen even though there were groups, organizations, both sides of the border, especially from Pakistan, claiming that there will be talks, there will be policide. But it shows that the Modi government is pretty stern and will be taking strict measure when it comes to the issue of national security and on the issue of terrorism. In fact, the president was shortly speaking and enumerating the priorities of the Modi government, and spoke about foreign policy in which there was no mention of Pakistan, which, as the former envoy said, that shows that Pakistan is now just another neighbor for India, and India will only seek good ties with Pakistan if Pakistan comes out with strong, verifiable action on the issue of terrorism.
Absolutely, indeed, Siddhant. That's an important point, because India's policy has always been very consistent. The talks and terror cannot go hand in hand. But Ambassador Kaju, the fact of the matter is India and Pakistan, they share such a long border, and even if we try to ensure that at this point of time there is no bilateral dialogue, the fact of the matter is we still will have to engage with each other to take this forward. Now, ever since Prime Minister Narendra Modi has in fact come back with his thumping majority, the Pakistani Prime Minister, he's been making several attempts to try and restart the process of dialogue. He congratulated the Prime Minister on Twitter. He has also written a letter to the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. My question to you, of course, sir, is this. India has made its stand absolutely clear, but in Pakistan, the situation is a lot more complex, because there are at least a couple of power centers, and Imran Khan, even if he wants to make these overtures of peace, is not the person who's calling the shots. Do you think India at this point of time needs to strengthen that camp in Pakistan which wants to make peace with India?
3 points I'll make. The first is that India's default position has always been that talks and terror can't go together. However, India itself has resiled many times from this proposition, and it has cost us whenever we've done so. The fact is that Prime Minister Modi in his first term also resiled till the Uri attack. After September of 2016, after the surgical strikes, it is heartening, and I think it is something which is to be applauded, that Mr. Modi has stuck to his position that talks and terror can't go together. The second point is, yes, there are I won't say there are multiple centers of power in Pakistan as far as India is concerned.
Right.
The only center of power that matters in Pakistan is the Pakistan Army. They decide Pakistan's policies towards India.
Right.
There can be a contribution of a marginal nature by the civilian leadership, but finally the view of the Pakistan Army prevails. Now, like Mr. Imran Khan, the Pakistan Army is also giving an indication that it wants the dialogue to be resumed.
Right.
But it is not given any indication that it is willing to abandon entirely and roll back completely on terror. That is not coming. The third point, you rightly said that India and Pakistan are neighbors. And between neighbors like India and Pakistan sharing such a long border, there has to be contact. And therefore, there is contact. After all, diplomatic channels are open. We have a High Commission in Islamabad. Pakistan has a High Commission in India.
Right.
There are regular talks on a weekly basis between the Director Generals of the Army of both countries. There is contact between the Pakistani Rangers and the Indian Border Security Force. So this kind of contact is there. And it should remain so, because human lives are concerned, because there are humanitarian interests. After all, there are prisoners, there are fishermen, and if there is no contact, then people suffer. What you have to distinguish is between contact and full engagement or dialogue.
Right.
Pakistan wants that there should be a full engagement, including on Jammu and Kashmir issue. We've said all that is not possible.
Absolutely.
And we've said that and maintained it since, as I said, September of 2016, that all that is not possible unless you give us clear evidence that you are abandoning this policy of use of terrorist organizations against India. That indication has not come as yet.
I think that's a very important point that you've made. I think that's a very important point that you've made, Ambassador Kaju. Meanwhile, we're also joined in by Strategic Affairs Analyst, Mr. Brahma Chilani, who's also joining us. Mr. Chilani, I want you to weigh in on the fact as to how the relationship between India and Pakistan is likely to play out. When Narendra Modi took charge as the Prime Minister in 2014, he'd invited the then Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif to his swearing-in ceremony. He also visited Pakistan. We saw the very, very friendly relationship between the two heads of the governments at that time. But things have changed since then. The diplomacy, or at least what we are seeing in terms of interchange between Imran Khan and Prime Minister Modi is taking place in the backdrop of Pulwama and the aftermath of this. How do you see this relationship going forward, sir?
We should not forget that in recent days alone, there have been several terrorist attacks in Jammu and Kashmir in which a number of Indian military personnel have been martyred, including an army officer of the rank of a major. So Pakistan is continuing its cross-border terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir at least. And in terms of its domestic situation, Pakistan is very vulnerable today. It's very vulnerable economically because its economy is on the brink of bankruptcy. Internationally, Pakistan faces growing pressure, if not isolation. The Financial Action Task Force sword is hanging over Pakistan's head. The IMF bailout package, has not come through as yet because the IMF has appended a number of stringent conditions that Pakistan has to meet first before the first tranche of IMF lending will flow to Pakistan.
Right.
So given that situation, Pakistan is very keen to resume dialogue with India. But India's interest is to keep Pakistan under sustained pressure.
Right.
It's very important for India to maintain multi-dimensional pressure on Pakistan. And India should, in fact, not let go of this opportunity to tighten the screws on Pakistan, because Pakistan has given no indication whatsoever that is ready to crack down on the terrorist groups that are operating freely from its territory. It has given no indication that it's willing to take verifiable and irreversible actions against terrorist groups operating from its soil. And unless and until India sees some action on that front, India should keep Pakistan under intense pressure.
I think that's an important point that you raise. And also in the wake of the recent events that have happened, the Pakistani Prime Minister is, of course, trying to restart the dialogue with India. And also, interestingly, over the course of the last few days, we had this intelligence alert that was given by Pakistan that there could be a terror attack in India, and which is what, of course, played out recently. My question to you, Mr. Brahmachalani, is, Pakistan is trying to project that it has changed its behavior, but the fact of the matter is, it still has not cracked down on terrorists that operate on its ground, even though in the last few days we've seen Pakistan saying that, look, we want to share intelligence alerts of possible terror attacks.
You raise an important question. Pakistan is all talk when it comes to combating terrorism. The reason is that the Prime Minister is powerless. He's basically the newest puppet of the military. Mm-hmm. The military calls the shots on strategic issues. The military has a cozy relationship with terrorists. It uses terrorists as proxies against India and Afghanistan. And even Iran in recent weeks and months has complained about Pakistani military using terrorists as proxies against Iran and staging attacks on Iranian troops on Iranian soil, attacks that have been linked to Pakistani terrorists with links to the Pakistan army. So all of Pakistan's neighbors face the same issue. The issue really is that Pakistan as a nation state has become a source of cross-border terrorism for all its neighbors. And that issue goes beyond India. But for India, this is a big threat. It's a big threat. It's a big threat for India in terms of its internal security. It's a big threat for India in terms of its economic growth, because major attacks like the one that happened in Mumbai, mm-hmm. they undermine investor confidence. They deal a major blow to investor confidence. And they are intangible costs of cross-border terrorist attacks in India. And these costs range from the economic costs to the psychological costs.
Absolutely.
So India is paying a heavy price for Pakistan's sponsorship of cross-border terrorism. Unfortunately, while Pakistan does not translate its words into actions, India, too, is reluctant to translate its words into real action. For example, to give you one important example, mm-hmm. India calls Pakistan as a terrorist state. For example, Indian officials at the UN General Assembly have labeled Pakistan as a terroristan. They have called Pakistan the epicenter of global terrorism. Mm-hmm. But India refuses to translate its words into policy action.
Right.
Indian policy still does not treat Pakistan as a terrorist state. India still maintains full diplomatic relations with Pakistan. Look at the size of the Pakistan High Commission in New Delhi.
Right.
They have more than 100 people.
Right.
Does this indicate that India treats Pakistan as a terrorist state? I'm not advocating abrogation of diplomatic relations.
Right.
But we can downsize the diplomatic missions, because we do not need so many diplomatic personnel. We have to send home the message that India is treating Pakistan as a terrorist state. We need to take some steps, sanctions that underscore India's determination to treat Pakistan as a terrorist state and to maintain intense pressure on Pakistan. So rhetoric alone will not suffice. Right. And saying that Pakistan has to create an atmosphere free of terror is fine. But what tangible actions is India taking to maintain pressure on Pakistan?
I think that's a very significant point that you've raised, Mr. Chilani, but we are completely out of time. This, of course, is a discussion that will continue. But for the time being, thank you very much indeed to all my guests, to Ambassador Kaju, and also to Mr. Brahmachalani, who joined us from New Delhi. This, of course...